Hello. Are we starting by,
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yes.
am I audible?
Yeah, yeah. Perfect.
When are we starting? Can we have the time?
Yeah, yeah, we are starting.
Just now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, Pele, from your end, it's
Yeah,
introduction.
yes, ma'am. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Gursimran Singh, Program Associate, Spare India. Welcome to today's webinar on including WASH in emergency, addressing the need of vulnerable population. And thank you for joining us. As we all know, access to water, sanitation, and hygiene is their fundamental human rights, but emergency often make it harder for a vulnerable community to access their services. And today we will explore challenges, best practices, and strategies to ensure uh, inclusive and accessible WASH services during the emergency. And we will have an excellent lineup of speakers and expert who will share their insight and experience. We engage you to engage and ask question, contribute the discussion. Now I would like to invite Miss Fatima ma'am, moderator of the day. Miss Fatima ma'am have four-year experience in disaster management, specialization in risk assessment, mitigation, and preparedness planning. Ma'am currently serving as a project associate at ICAS Roorkee. Uh, Thank you, ma'am. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Simran, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fatima. I am today moderating this important session on the inclusive wash in emergencies, addressing the needs of vulnerable population. Before we dive into this discussion, I'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all the esteemed speakers and participants for joining us today. And this webinar is in collaborative effort between Fair India Academy and IGERS. And we aim to shed light on pressing needs for inclusive wash solution in emergency solution. So, without wasting much time, like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Purna Chandra Mohanty. And before that, I'd like to give a brief introduction of sir. Mr. Purna Mohanty is a technical specialist, sanitation at WaterAid India, where he provides political and technical support at the national level. He holds a master's degree in social work and bachelor's degree in civil engineering, along with an advanced diploma in water resource management. With over 2 decades of experience, Mr. Mohanty is leading expert in WASH, a specialization in sustainable sanitation, advanced toilet technologies, waste and fecal uh, sludge management, and water security. His expertise also covers universal design for inclusive infrastructure and home-based adaptations. He has worked with grassroots organizations, international agencies, and government, including UNDP, Handicap International, CARE, OSDMA, and WaterAid. He has led response and recovery efforts for over 25 mega disasters in India and played a key role in strengthening the interagency group in Odisha. A respected author and advocate, Mr. Mohanty has published widely a ground management, rainwater harvesting, disabling inclusive water standards, and disaster resilient programs. He is committed to ensure access to clean water, sanitation, and resilient infrastructure and fundamental rights for all. I welcome you, sir, to this webinar, and the floor is all yours. We are not we are not able to hear you, sir, or am I not able to hear? Simran, can you just please
Yes,
confirm?
ma'am. I'm also not able to hear.
Mohanty ji, if you can just rejoin as we are not able to hear you properly. Simran, can you just confirm if sir is joining?
Yes,
Otherwise,
yes,
we can
yeah,
go to the next
yes.
speaker. Meanwhile, sir joins. You just
Let me go.
confirm.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Ma'am, I think sir will join in 10 to 15 minutes. I think we'll invite
So I
next
guess
speaker.
we can
Yeah.
move to the next speaker.
Yes.
So we are sorry for this technical glitch. I guess it was from their end, and I guess I'll be inviting the next speaker of the session, Miss Durba Biswas. She's an environmental economist with PhD, focused on estimating the economic value of canal irrigation water in North Karnataka. In recent years, she has embraced an increasingly interdisciplinary research approach concentrating on water and sanitation wash issues in India. Her current research broadly explores the irrigation of gender and minority perspective into national and state level sanitation and water policies. A key focus of our work is examining the relationship between a gendered agency and access to water and sanitation. Ms. Dr. Durba collaborates with national and international universities, NGOs, and research organizations on various projects. Her recent research is rooted in urban and peri-urban slums in villages in Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, addressing critical challenges in water and sanitation for marginalized communities. I welcome you, ma'am, for this workshop. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about the issue that I'm going to talk about. Just give me a moment while I share the PowerPoint. Um, is everybody able to see it?
Uh,
Can you see the?
yes, yes. Now we were able to speak.
So hi everyone, I'm going to be talking about transgender inclusive sanitation in India. So basically, I have about 15 plus years of experience working in the wash sector. Most of my focus is on looking at gender and marginalized communities. I also work on challenges of nature-based solution. And as Fatima mentioned, I work across the urban, rural, peri-urban scale of development, especially in the southern part of India. And without wasting much time, I'll just get started on the topic of transgender inclusive sanitation in India. So, first question is, why do we need to even look at transgender inclusive sanitation in India? Firstly, we know that at an international level, there is plethora of research which says that sanitation has deep impacts on health and well-being of individuals. And right now, there is an emerging strand of research which talks about not just physical well-being and health, but also mental well-being and health as well. And therefore consequently you see a lot of funds and resources have gone into improving sanitation facilities in the global south, and this has happened at state level, national level, and international level. And World Bank, you can take a look at a number of estimates. I have just used World Bank estimates, which shows that between 2010 and 2020, India's access to basic sanitation has gone up from 42% to 70%, which is a remarkable jump. And while this improvement in sanitation was taking place, as we were learning as policymakers and us as researchers, as we were learning, we also realized that, when we are talking about sanitation, we are not talking about a homogenized sort of a community. We realize that the needs of women and girls, for example, are different from men and boys. Similarly, in recent decades, there is also a lot of discussion about how sanitation has to be inclusive for not just women and girls, but also for those with disabilities, those who are elderly, children, and also transgender individuals. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking a little bit about transgender inclusive sanitation, because that is something which is very, very minutely studied in Indian context, at least. And so, starting off with a very hopeful sort of a discussion, in that saying, India has actually made pretty decent progress in trying to safeguard the rights of transgender individuals. There are a lot of very valid criticisms of how it is being done, and one can use those criticisms to improve the rights of transgender individuals in public spaces. In terms of sanitation, currently, if you look at how sanitation for transgender individuals is considered in India, you would see that in public spaces, transgender individuals are either offered toilets which are earmarked for them as a third gender or transgender, or they have been given the right to use any of the public toilets which are typically marked as male or female that aligns with their stated gender. However, we realize that these two solutions, while they are better than having no toilets in public spaces, continue to be spaces of challenge for transgender individuals. So what are these challenges that we are talking about? So the first, and I think everyone would sort of be familiar with the concept of transgender individuals facing a lot of physical and verbal violence and intolerance when they try to use the bathroom, especially when they are marked for men and women. And that comes from an inherent transphobia that is present in some degree across the global south and even the global north, as actually. And so while they are able to have access on paper to toilets that sort of corresponds to their stated gender, they are also exposed to violence and violence. It can be physical violence, it can be verbal violence as well. And ultimately, what happens is that you would see that individuals from transgender communities would either continue to practice open defecation, or they would withhold going to the bathroom unless it's empty or you don't see a lot of people there. And why does it matter at a policy level? For example, if you keep building toilets and you're trying to end open defecation without taking into account these nuances of how transgender individuals face these challenges, you're essentially not able to really address the problem of open defecation in India. Apart from that, verbal and physical violence, which can be quite dehumanizing, there is also a problem of degradation of sanitation infrastructure over a period of time. In a lot of cases, public sanitation infrastructure is sort of built without much resources left over for continued maintenance and operation of the system. And this is not just limited to transgender individuals. This is the fate of public toilets across India, where the infrastructure is built with a lot of thought and a lot of, inclusivity, but without proper maintenance and operations of the system, it degrades over a period of time, and then you just have husks of toilets scattered all over public places, and people then again have to either go for open defecation or withhold going to the bathroom at all, and that limits their movement in society as well, right? At least as women, we can sort of empathize with the fact that if you're going on long journeys outside of the city, one of the things that you consider is that, are there going to be restrooms available? Is there a safe space for me to relieve myself if I need to go there? So this problem of degradation of sanitation infrastructure is much bigger. But for transgender individuals, it becomes even more critical, because if you're talking about bathrooms earmarked for transgender individuals, which are far and few in between in any city or even in outside of cities, and when they degrade, whatever little access they had to public sanitation also sort of degrades. The third challenge for transgender individuals is the lack of number of sanitation facilities as such. And one of the reasons why that happens is because there is a serious undercounting of transgender number of transgender individuals in our society as such. And the reason for that is the way large data is collected. If you look at census, the older census data, you would see that there is no space for collecting data on transgender individuals. And if you look at national family health surveys, I'm not sure about the latest round, but till very recently, they followed pretty strict gender binaries in calculating what is the male and the female population, and then collecting their health and household information. And so large scale data which are used for policy making purposes and for research, you don't really know how many transgender individuals we do have. And therefore, when you use these numbers to provide sanitation facilities for them, there is a huge gap between what is required and what is actually being provided. And so, what should policymakers consider when they're thinking about transgender inclusive sanitation? Like I said, India has made very positive strides in the long run, but the fear is that just like if you add women to sanitation, the problems still continue, right? In public spaces, you see the problems that existed a couple of decades ago are sort of replicated even now. The same fate can await even transgender individuals who are for whom we want to build more toilets to make them feel secure and make them feel dignified while they are using these toilets. So what are the things that we need to consider? First is age. When we talk about transgender inclusive sanitation, we typically think only about public toilets in public spaces. So you might think of toilets on the roadsides, or you might think of toilets in parks and things like that. But what we really need to consider is that we are not only thinking about inclusive sanitation for adult transgender individuals. We also have to look at how their history as children was. So you might have to think about transgender inclusive sanitation in other public spaces or semi-public places like schools, colleges, malls, and offices as well, which can be problematic if there is no way of in bringing that into an imagination of what transgender sanitation actually implies. So I can empathize that it might be really challenging to talk to children, transgender children, especially in a traditional context of India. But what one can do from policymakers' point of view or even researchers' point of view is to talk to adult transgender individuals and ask them about their experiences from school, and use those retrospective insights to figure out what can be done to make sure that sanitation, their sanitation needs are met, not just in public spaces, but also, as I mentioned, school, colleges, and malls. And it is really important to do that because there is a plethora of research that shows that as children are growing up, sanitation needs are one of the most crucial things that impacts their overall mental health and well-being, not just their physical health. So it's very important to look at the entire age lifetime of a transgender individual to figure out what their sanitation needs are and how that can be met in public spaces. The other important consideration to sort of take care of is the concept of caste and class, because those from marginalized communities and marginalized identities might not have the same access to resources or to people, or that kind of help them to get certain kind of infrastructure within their community as well. It might also limit them from meeting the right people or talking to the right people or getting their voice heard. So there has to be a focused effort to understand not just the need of transgender individuals in cities, for example. You might have to reach out in rural areas, in peri-urban areas, in really poor areas, or in areas which are very prone to natural disasters as well. And so this caste and class becomes really important to consider, even though in Indian policymakers, the way they design toilets, they think of transgender community as a homogeneous community. It's not a homogeneous community. There is a lot of heterogeneity within that community as well. The other thing that you might have to consider is the problem of disability. Now, very rarely do you think when policymakers or even any NGOs and all, when they're making these toilets or having these discussions about transgender inclusive sanitation, there isn't enough discussion about how disability is an important part of the transgender life for those who are disabled and transgender as well. And therefore, that has to reflect in the type of sanitation facilities, sanitation infrastructure design that you are making. And that one can only do properly if you can consider that there is more to transgender individuals rather than just their gender expression or their stated gender. I mean, the other thing that we need to really look at is the idea of parenthood. Like when we think of transgender individuals, especially in the global south, there is very little discussion about parenthood. For example, when you go to women's restrooms in malls and offices, airports especially, you at least in these high-end locations, you would see that women's bathrooms are well equipped with diaper changing machines or diapers and things like that, which is not available for transgender individuals who may be parents, but they don't have any space of taking care of their own children or the sanitation needs of their own children when they are in these public spaces. So how do you make sanitation in public spaces, the sanitation infrastructure, inclusive so that parents who are transgender can take care of their children as well? The other complex issue is, of course, there are transgender, especially trans men, those who experience menstruation and those who experience periods. The issue is that you would find all, especially in urban spaces, you would find a lot of benefits that women's bathroom can have for women who are experiencing or going through menstruation. You might find sanitation, some menstrual goods, menstrual products available to them. But the same cannot be said about a transgender individual, especially trans men, who might want to use a men's bathroom. They will not have access to menstruation products or period products for their use. And this can be seriously problematic because it limits their movement in public. Again, it limits how much they can be part of the public life if they don't have access to basic sanitation products, menstrual products in public sanitation infrastructure. And finally, I think perhaps I should have started with this, I think, but one of the most important thing is sensitization. There is a lot of underlying transphobia, as I mentioned, and the transphobia sort of makes their life in public spaces in general fairly exposed to violence. And therefore, there is a need for concerted sensitization so that the rights and privileges of transgender individuals are preserved as they are moving in public, including using sanitation facilities. And so, because this is a very short 10-minute presentation, I'll stop now. This is a very vast topic, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But very briefly, when policymakers are thinking about building transgender inclusive sanitation, my research into this topic over the couple of years has shown that all of these uh, all of these pointers that I have mentioned here are actually something that will undermine the benefit and the investment that is going into making transgender inclusive sanitation, which means that as policymakers build these toilets or NGOs are building these toilets, assuming there is a benefit that transgender individuals are able to use it, but because they are not really taking into account age, caste, and class, disability, parenthood, menstruation, what happens is that it prevents transgender individuals from actually using the toilets, and therefore it is undermining the benefit of the investment and the resources that have gone into building these infrastructure for them. So from a policymaker's point of view, it is beneficial to build these structures, keeping in mind a nuanced understanding of what are the needs of transgender inclusive sanitation through the lifespan of that individual and not just for adults. With that, I'll end my talk here. If you are interested in learning a bit more about this topic, you can refer to my chapter, which has come out in Routledge Handbook of Gender and Water Governance. It's freely downloadable. You can Google it and you'll find it there. With that, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. There's one question for you. It's from Mukul, and it's saying that is universal design not appropriate to address their need?
Universal design is not no, it is not, because uh, the problem there is that in India, because of underlying transphobia, not every individual wants to broadcast their identity. If you are talking about universal, everyone can use it. It depends on the context in which it has been placed. For example, you might assume that a international corporate office which has universal sanitation facility might be much more conducive for a transgender individual to use that sanitation facility. But perhaps that might not work in a much more public space like a park or a road, where if your identity, if you're not able to pass as the stated gender that you're stating, you are actually most likely going to be exposed to violence, and violence of both physical and sexual nature, and of course verbal nature as well. So there is actually a need to figure out how in which locality what kind of sanitation will work. And the provision of sanitation cannot be sort of just like an independent technical or an infrastructural exercise. It goes hand in hand with trying to also sensitizing individuals in that community so that the violence that they face is reduced.
Thank you so much. So, you very rightly answered, what the question was cited to you. We all know that inclusive sanitation is essential for dignity and safety. While India has made progress in transgender individuals, but it still faces barrier in accessing wash service. So, ensuring truly inclusive facilities is a step towards equality. So, thank you so much for your
Thank
presentation.
you for having me.
Yes. So,
I'll stop sharing now.
yes, so I guess Simran, can we move to the third first, or we can go to the next speaker?
Um,
The
I don't know if I've stopped sharing.
Yes, it has been stopped. I am not able to share it.
yes.
Hmm. So should we go to Mr. Purna Mohanty sir, or should we go to the next speaker?
I, I think it's
Mohanty sir is joined. So Mohanty sir,
yes, ma'am. Sir is here.
Am I audible now?
yes, yes, perfect.
Perfectly.
Yeah. Just let me allow a few minutes, few seconds to open my slide. Is my slide visible now?
Yes. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much bearing with me. I had gone with a little problem, so could not connect before in my scheduled time. I will focus on resilient, inclusive WAS solutions. Means what are the challenges that we generally face if we are staying in a coastal community, wherein frequently we experience flood and cyclone. And in that case, what should be the next solution measures that we should have to follow? And in WaterAid, we have made some solutions with respect to field implementation, and I will go through that. I will quickly go through my slides. Is my slide changing? If anybody can make a
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
yes, thank you. So, first of all, if we'll discuss regarding the issue that we face, whenever we are telling was, we are considering both drinking water and sanitation. Whenever we are talking about the infrastructure, and along with the infrastructure, the software component, we always deal with the hygiene, the behavior and practice that is intact for every component of us. But especially whenever we are facilitating the drinking water sources or resources, then we are generally facing few problems. This is not that much big an issue that nobody knows about it. But just to highlight the thing is, mostly people still in the areas people are depending upon hand pumps and groundwater, though we are now experiencing implementation of Jal Jeevan Mission (JJM) in our country, but in most of the places, and especially during this crucial time, we experience that people used to access to hand pumps just to access their drinking water, and they depend upon groundwater. Mostly, they depend upon groundwater, though in some cases, surface water, lead, and drinking water facility are there. If there is a surface water, so during the disaster, mostly due to the power failure, people also get interrupt in their power in their drinking water supply. So they probably often during the disaster response period, they don't able to get drinking water, which is very crucial. And if we are considering any solution measures, we should have to think about how we can reach out to the people so that they can rebuild their mechanism to access to the drinking water during the disaster response period even, and not just depending upon the relief water that we are getting as bottled water or pouches, which is not that much healthy and recommended that we can get through. So this is a concern that we should always have to keep some mechanism in place so that during disaster response period, water availability should be there in the community for drinking water. Along with that, we always experience if there is a disaster happen, then the water gets contaminated, especially the surface water. Sometimes the groundwater also is getting contaminated, and contamination happens due to mostly due to the bacteriological contamination. Sometimes, if the chemical contamination is there, that is prolonged, and that we'll have to address. But mostly in the coastal area, we experience the contamination is due to the bacterial contamination, and in coastal places, some places we also get into experience that salinity intrusion is there. So we get saline water at the first layer, second layer, or third layer of aquifer. So people are accessing to saline water if they are not taking up the measures properly. And overall, there is a question whether the drinking water supply system is having a community participation. These are all some issues that highlighted that I wanted to highlight due to the for the drinking water in coastal plate, groundwater table is at lower depth. So traditional toilet, this is regarding the toilet thing. I'm sorry, I could not able to change the slide. It is still showing drinking water, but this is regarding the sanitation. And with respect to sanitation, we experience that in this coastal region, we find out water at a lower depth, this groundwater table at a lower depth, and that is why this groundwater is getting easily contaminated due to the external applications, due to the contamination that happens on the surface. With respect to toilet, if it is traditional toilet, then it easily contaminates the subsurface and groundwater. So traditional toilet may not be feasible at one place wherein we can promote if it is a place like a coastal area or disaster prone area. And mostly our Swachh Bharat Mission toilets are mainly the twin speed toilet or single speed toilet that we are experiencing in the field. And due to these toilets, again the second level problem is arising that we are increasing the contamination in the groundwater. So we'll have to address both accessibility to the toilet and along with the fecal sludge management that needs to be addressed at on site, that properly we can address that so that we can avoid contamination to the groundwater. Again, bad odor and wastewater stagnation, then it becomes the place becomes a mosquito breeding place that becomes very unhygienic. So these are all situations that happens which generates to next level of problem in post-disaster condition. So we need to, whenever we are talking about the toilet technology, we need to build the toilet which is disaster resilient and also disability inclusive. So whenever we are taking up the inclusion into consideration, we will have to consider disability resilient if we are addressing that in the coastal region. Then in the Swachh Bharat mission, as I have already told, we are addressing means the Swachh Bharat mission is advising that we should go for one type of toilet, which is a twin speed toilet or single speed toilet. But is that appropriate in a context of our country? So if that is not appropriate, what are other technologies that are applicable? If we are staying in a hilly region, if we are staying in other disaster-prone region, if we are staying in a region with alluvial soil, if we are staying with a region in all other conditions. So what should be the technological solutions that we can adhere to so that we can get a appropriate solution? Few challenges. We have surface water body. The surface water body is getting easily contaminated due to disaster. People cannot access to their regular going places. Even people are depending upon the water bodies in the village rural area. So if the water body is getting contaminated, water body is getting affected due to the foreign materials, then that becomes a contaminated place, needs to be cleaned. But further post disaster, weed also becoming the weed growth also becoming another case that we are facing problem. Whenever we are considering the groundwater, surface water is getting contaminated and groundwater also is getting contaminated due to the submergence. If we do not have have the hand pump or other water sources that are in a particular perfect condition, perfect workable condition, then that also helps in contaminating groundwater. And that groundwater, we are taking those groundwater as a contaminated thing. So this creates a health risk, and to avoid that, we need to address all these things. So whenever we are just considering the challenges of people with disability in different places, say just I have taken few examples, but there would be many if we are collecting those from the field. In case of a public place, if we are looking into the toilet, still we can look into the toilet or sanitation facilities that are existing nearer to the bus stop or some other marketplace or some other similar public places. Are these sanitation complex constructed disability inclusive? If it has been constructed disability inclusive, means whether only providing a ramp may not be with adequate design with adequate standards can fulfill the purpose of the person with disability. If not, then what should be the next step that we should have to taken up? In case of a community, whenever we are considering the people with disability are accessing the community sanitation complex, are these community sanitation complex inclusive in nature? Even though we are providing the inclusive in nature, are these a hygienic place that a old woman or a women, or we are just talking about the transgender, and there are few people with children and other vulnerable group, can they easily access to this facility? If not, what are the measures that we should have to take? Even the regular constructed toilets through the flagship program, are these addressing properly the person with disability who is staying in our family, that the person with disability can use the facility with a dignity? If not, then we should have to address this thing. Even though we are providing the facility, we are going for the construction of toilets or sanitation blocks or similar structures in different places, at households, in institutions, and in other places. Are they adequate? Are they adequate for the children? Are they adequate for the girl or woman? Are they adequate for other people that they can easily access? We are observing there are challenges. We should have to change our mindset, and we should have to consider the design aspect. May not be as per the universal design standard, but we should have to consider the design aspect. And while considering, we should have to talk to the person with disability, talk to the woman with disability, talk to the child with disability, and find out the solution. And accordingly, we can provide a provision so that it can be addressed properly. So in WaterAid, we are looking into a principle. So that the principle is not equality, but equity. Means the diagram shows, if we are providing the equal facility to everybody, still the person with wheelchair may not able to access, may not able to see the football match that is happening at the other side of the screen in the field itself. The girl who is having a small height may not be able to easily access to see the facility. If we are providing similar provisioning that people can access properly, people can visualize the map, then the equity matters, and equity is a concern that we should have to consider while we are providing different disaster resilient considerations. So going ahead, a few field level implementations that we have undertaken with respect to disaster resilient and disability inclusive features. In this picture, we are showing the community water point, especially the hand pump. As I was telling you, in most of the cases, pipe water supply is getting interrupted to some period. Just post disaster situation, people are depending upon the hand pumps. So in that case, can we do a little bit effort? Can you put a little bit effort and change the design consideration to make it inclusive and make it disaster resilient? We should have considered what is the high flood level that is there in the community, and this platform of the structure should be above the high flood level, so that we can provide a ramp as well. We can provide an accessible step so that people can easily access to the facility. And of course, we will have to consider the wastewater to be managed properly. So because it is a common water sources, so the wastewater can be managed properly through the deward system, through reed bed, through soak pit, and through some similar measures, so that it will not further stagnate the surrounding. It will not further create any unhygienic condition to the surrounding. So it will be easily accessed. It is safe. People can access immediately during the disaster and after the disaster to these facilities. This can be one of the solutions that we can think about. Going ahead, we have our cyclone shelters, we have our institutions as shelters, as node points. And in that case, if we can consider community water point, if we have a private supply, if we can consider community water point having some accessible water taps, and those can be viable, those can be easily accessed during the disaster response period, and people can easily access that. Only the thing is, we'll have to disinfect the water if it is getting contaminated, so that people can get safe drinking water. They don't have to need about the distillery water, about this other water that they can access during the disaster response period. In case of household level condition, we are seeing that there are most of the households are getting submerged, and even the tap connection that is provided through the Jal Jeevan Mission program, that also getting submerged. So people cannot able to access drinking water, if they are coming back to home and when they are during the disaster period. So if we can think about the tap connection, which is above the high flow level, that also can be a measure that we can consider as a design consideration and a safe drinking water source that from where we can access drinking water facilities. Coming to the toilet, accessibility is one of the concerns. Means we can access to the superstructure toilet. Whenever we are considering toilet, we can divide it into two parts. One is a superstructure, one is a substructure, and both way we'll have to consider the design, safe design consideration while we are addressing this thing. So whenever we are considering the superstructure should be accessible, maybe accessible providing a pathway at the same level from the household to the toilet, so that it can be easily accessed. Or otherwise, we can raise the height of the toilet so that it can be easily accessed. And similarly, if there is a twin lease fit, we can consider the twin lease fit. The height of the twin lease fit should be above the high floor level, so that it may not contaminate directly the water to the surrounding. It can withstand the water contamination during the post-disaster situation. Similarly, in case of the toilet, individual household toilet, we can raise the platform. Even we are going for the septic tank, we can consider the septic tank connected with a soak pit, and all are covered above the high floor level with a high raised platform that can also prove the purpose in a waterlogged condition, in a condition where flood water maroon the surrounding, and we can safeguard our sanitation system. Even we can access to the toilet facility during the disaster response period. Considering the fecal sludge management, another option is bio toilet, biodigester. And the biodigester is the substructure part. Whenever we are considering the accessibility at the superstructure, the substructure part also will have to access the in the substructure. Water should not contaminate to the surroundings, and easily it can be managed. So the biodigester is a toilet where we can facilitate on-site fecal sludge management system, and this is very much effective, very much viable in the flood-prone locality, in the coastal locality. And we had constructed a lot of similar toilets in institutions, in household level, and in other community sanitation complex. Evapotranspiration toilet, this is another technology where if the area is a waterlogged area, we can go for evapotranspiration toilet, wherein the fecal sludge will not penetrate down to the soil. It will on a capillary action, it will come to the top of the soil, and therein it can be captured by the plants that are going. Generally, the plants are the canna plant or banana plant, which will help in the sludge management, and which will help in the total safe sanitation practices. Going ahead, these are all few structures that we have taken up in institutions. In case of institutions, we have considered the toilet with disability features. If there is a girl toilet block, it should also have a facility of menstrual hygiene management system, so safe disposal and storage should be there in the toilet complex. There should be handrails available. Handrails can be of GI, can be of local material, but this shall be considered. And whenever we are providing handrails, we should have to consider the height of the girls or height of the children that are those who are accessing the toilet. And in case of hand wash stations, we also can consider the height of children. There would be different height of different children, so we can facilitate accessing the hand wash facility at different heights so that they can easily access the point and they can easily do the behavior activity there. In case of Anganwadi, we can also consider in the similar way the accessible toilet, which is also a disaster resilient. We should have to consider toilet at a higher location. Otherwise, we can consider the toilet base will be high rise. Similarly, these are all few structures that we have considered using the local available material, because in the rural area we may not able to access the facility that we can get commode and other facilities, and we also can get steel to utilize as a bar. So we can consider bamboo, wooden bars, and even GI pipes as a local material which can be used, and even the modified commode seat using the masonry construction. These are all using the local skill, local material. We also can innovate a little bit to make it accessible and resilient. So furthermore, these are all few design considerations. These are all standards with dimension and everything. We are considering this while we are considering the design. The person with disability can easily access through a ramp or through accessible steps into the toilet, open the door, get inside to the toilet. There should be a space wherein the wheelchair can be moved or the person can move around comfortably, can access to the commode with the support of grab bar, can use a hand washing, and then can easily come back. So all the facilities are there, and all the facilities are locally made, and even the ramps and other accessible features are demonstrated, which we are generally taking up the design consideration while we are considering the different factors. Even we also are considering the provisioning of color band. If this color band are for the low vision people who can access easily to the toilet facility, if the toilet is
Please,
in a common place, that we can.
sir, sorry to interrupt. Actually, we are exceeding the time limit.
Yeah, and I'm just completing. This is my last slide. So,
Okay.
just I wanted to complete with a word that whenever we are making this facility, we are working with the people with disability in the community and the people with disability group that they are there, and through them we are conducting social audit, which helps us to provide different design considerations perfectly, and the people can use it comfortably. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Uh, Thank you for rightly saying how resilient and inclusive wash sector solutions must ensure access for all, including the marginalized group. The sustainable infrastructure and policies should address the uniqueness needs of every individual, fostering dignity, safety, and equality. So, how that we can strengthen efforts to achieve truly inclusive wash. So, thank you so much for your presentation. Now I'll move forward and to our next speaker is I'd like to introduce her. It's Ms. Divya Gupta. She is a seasoned humanitarian professional and climate advocate with 20 years of experience marginalizing operations and driving resilient building initiatives since 2024. She has led responses to 10 major crises, including the Assam floods, tsunami, Gujarat floods, Kashmir earthquake, and Nepal earthquake. Her expertise encompasses immediate relief, transition, response, and long-term rehabilitation with focus on water, sanitation, environment sanitation, and hygiene promotion. As a co-founder of the Climate Action Resource Network Asia Pacific, and WICCI Gujarat CSR Council, Ms. Gupta has showcased her commitment to address pressing social and environmental issues. She has also played a pivotal role in national emergency coordination during COVID-19 pandemic, providing strategic support to a state interagency groups and networks recognized with accolades like the 9th Udgam Women Achievers of Gujarat Award 2018. She has trained over 12,000 individuals, including communities, government officials, and NGO staff in capacity building and advocacy. At Seeds India, Ms. Gupta oversees advocacy, partnership, and localization efforts, ensuring disaster response and tailored to community needs. Her work is dedicated to fostering resilience, equality, and sustainability, creating meaningful impact for vulnerable communities. I welcome you, ma'am.
Hello everyone. Sorry for joining late. मुझे जो जिम्मेदारी आज दी गई थी वो थी स्ट्रेटजी पे बात करने की। कैसे हम जब वॉश की बात करते हैं इमरजेंसीज के दौरान तो जेंडर रिस्पॉन्सिव वॉश स्ट्रेटजीज हमारी होनी चाहिए। तो हम अपने शुरुआत के प्रोसेस से लेके आगे तक का अगर पूरा एक साइकिल देखते हैं, तो सबसे पहले जैसे मान लीजिए कि अगर कोई इमरजेंसी आती है और हमें जाके नीड असेसमेंट करना होता है, हम कभी जीआरएनए करते हैं, कभी आरएनए करते हैं, जॉइंट होता है, कभी एक दो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन अकेले भी करते हैं। तो हम जो रैपिड नीड असेसमेंट करते हैं, हमारे टूल में ही बनाने के टाइम पे या रिफाइन करने के टाइम पे हमें ये चीज देखनी पड़ेगी कि हमारा जितने भी वॉर से रिलेटेड क्वेश्चंस हैं, उनमें हमने विमेन्स की जो स्पेशल नीड्स है उनको ध्यान में रखा कि नहीं रखा। कि मान लीजिए उनकी जो मेंस्ट्रुअल से रिलेटेड नीड्स है, उनको जो वाटर की सप्लाई की उन्हें जरूरत है, या जो भी उनकी नीड्स हैं उनको हमने ध्यान में रखा कि नहीं रखा। मैं एक बहुत बढ़िया सा एक टूल है जो ग्लोबली काफी अभी पॉपुलर हुआ है पिछले 2 सालों में। उसमें ऐसे वो एक गाइडलाइन है जिसमें बताया गया है कि कैसे हमारे जो आरएनए टूल्स हैं उनको हम और ज्यादा रिफाइन कर सकते हैं, जेंडर को ध्यान में रखते हुए। तो मैं इसमें जो डाल रही हूँ चैट बॉक्स में, आप लोग जरूर एक बार उसको पढ़िएगा और देखिएगा, उससे आपको काफी कुछ वो मिलेगा। और इसके अलावा जैसे मान लीजिए कि जैसे एक एग्जांपल मैं आपको देखती हूँ, जैसे जब केरला में जब 2018 का फ्लड हुआ था, उसके बाद में जब सभी ने जो जॉइंट रैपिड नीड असेसमेंट हुआ था जिसमें गवर्नमेंट और एनजीओ सबने मिलकर किया था, उसमें जब आप वो वाला टूल पढ़ेंगे तो उस टूल में स्पेसिफिकली जेंडर से उनकी जो विमेन की जो नीड्स है उनको बहुत अच्छे से क्लैरिफाई किया गया था। इसीलिए जो डेटा भी आया था वो इतना सही आया था कि जितनी भी एजेंसीज ने रिस्पॉन्स किया उनको अपना वॉश रिस्पॉन्स प्लान करना बहुत सटीक तरीके से, बहुत इजी तरीके से वो कर पाए थे। इसके बाद ये है इम्पोर्टेंट कि हम सेफ एंड डिग्निफाइड सैनिटेशन कैसे उनको इंश्योर कराएं विमेन को, चाहे वो इमरजेंसी के दौरान अपने घर पे रह रहे हो या अपने किसी रिलेटिव के यहाँ शिफ्ट होना पड़ा हो या उनको कैंप में जाना पड़ा हो। 2-3 चीजें बड़ी इंपॉर्टेंट है। एक तो है उनकी प्राइवेसी। बहुत बार एक ही रूम में बहुत सारे मेल फीमेल रहते हैं, तो क्या उनकी प्राइवेसी मेंटेन हो पा रही है या उनकी सिक्योरिटी मेंटेन हो पा रही है। जो टॉयलेट है या नहाने की जगह है, कई बार भी लोग तो ओपन में नहा लेते हैं, क्या विमेन के लिए नहाने की सुविधा है, प्राइवेसी है, पानी की अवेलेबिलिटी है उनके लिए कि नहीं है, या टॉयलेट पे लाइट है कि नहीं है, ताकि वो रात के टाइम भी वॉशरूम यूज करने जाए तो उनको कोई थ्रेट ना हो। तो उनका सेफ्टी और डिग्निटी दोनों चीजों को मेंटेन करने की स्ट्रेटेजी हमारी प्लानिंग में होनी चाहिए। फिर है मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन मैनेजमेंट। हम सब जानते हैं मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन मैनेजमेंट के बारे में, लेकिन हम में से बहुत लोग मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन मैनेजमेंट को सिर्फ एक सैनिटरी नैपकिन के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से देखते हैं। सैनिटरी मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन मैनेजमेंट सिर्फ सैनिटरी नैपकिन नहीं है। उसमें आपको जो एब्जॉर्बेंट के ऑप्शंस हैं वो उनके कल्चरली जो उनका अपना एक प्रैक्टिसेस है उसको ध्यान में रखते हुए डिजाइन करना है। जरूरी नहीं है कि वो कम्युनिटी के फीमेल गर्ल्स जो हैं वो सैनिटरी पैड ही यूज करते हो सकता है कि वो कपड़ा यूज करती हूँ। तो कपड़ा में कौन सा सेफ ऑप्शन है वो आपको उनको देना है, उसके बारे में अवेयरनेस देनी है, कैसे वो उसको मेंटेन कर सके। और एब्जॉर्बेंट तो एक चीज हुआ, एक आइटम हुआ, लेकिन एब्जॉर्बेंट के अलावा एक तो उनको आपको एक आईसी ये देना है, अवेयरनेस देनी है कि कैसे मेंस्ट्रुअल के दौरान अपने आप को उन्हें मेंटेन रखना है, न्यूट्रिशियस फूड खाना है, प्राइवेसी मेंटेन करनी है, हाइजीन मेंटेन करनी है, पानी की सप्लाई उनको मिले। तो वो सब चीजें बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। फिर एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट आता है जो हम स्पेशली जो हमारे फ्लड जैसी इमरजेंसी है इसमें हम कई बार मिस कर जाते हैं, इनको डिस्पोज करना। यूज्ड किए हुए एब्जॉर्बेंट को डिस्पोज करना एक बहुत बड़ा काम है जो कई बार हमारी स्ट्रेटेजी का पार्ट नहीं होता। हमको लगता है कि हमने सैनिटरी नैपकिन डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर दिया, हमारा काम खत्म हो गया। कैसे डिस्पोज होगा उसके लिए अरेंजमेंट, मान लीजिए कि अगर इलेक्ट्रिसिटी है तो उससे रिलेटेड उनके इंसिनेटर्स हो सकते हैं। उस एरिया में इलेक्ट्रिसिटी नहीं है तो बहुत सारे अर्थन पॉट के बने हुए आजकल जो है इंसिनेटर्स मौजूद है मार्केट में, जिसमें आप अंदर बंद करके लगा सकते हैं, जिससे ना तो कोई धुआं बाहर आएगा, ना ही कोई और अंदर यूज किए हुए पैड्स और कपड़े जल जाएंगे। या गड्ढा करके एक पिट करके वो उसको जला सकते हैं। तो उस तरह के ऑप्शंस उनको बहुत सारी अवेयरनेस, एजुकेशन, और यहाँ तक कि उस दौरान बहुत साइको सोशल सपोर्ट की भी जरूरत पड़ती है कि अगर मुझे तकलीफ हो रही है, दर्द हो रहा है और मैं सरवाइव नहीं कर पा रही हूँ, तो एक ऐसा पीरियड होता है कि जहाँ जो उनका आसपास का सिस्टम है, फैमिली की दूसरी विमेन जो है या आशा वर्कर, आंगनवाड़ी वर्कर, जो कम्युनिटी वॉलंटियर्स, वो उनको कैसे इजी रख सके, कैसे उनको और साइको सोशल सपोर्ट दे सके, वो भी जरूरी है। तो मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन मैनेजमेंट सिर्फ एक सैनिटरी पैड नहीं है, एक तो ये है कि आपको एब्जॉर्बेंट के ऑप्शंस उनके कल्चर से को मैच करते हुए उन्हें देने पड़ेंगे। दूसरा चीज उसका डिस्पोजल का इंतजाम सोचना पड़ेगा उनको। तीसरा चीज उनको अवेयरनेस देना कि कैसे यूज करना है, कैसे डिस्पोज करना है, कैसे अपना हाइजीन मेंटेन करना है, और प्राइवेसी देना, पानी और साबुन की सुविधा उपलब्ध कराना, क्योंकि बिना पानी और साबुन के वो अपना हाइजीन मेंटेन नहीं कर सकते। फिर हम बात करते हैं, जैसे मान लीजिए आसाम फ्लड के टाइम पे ये चीज बहुत हुई थी कि काफी सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने कपड़े जो वहाँ लोकली वो जो कॉटन का कपड़ा यूज करते थे, मैरून कलर के कपड़े का पैड बना के उनको डिस्ट्रीब्यूट किया था काफी सारे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस ने। इंक्लूजन ऑफ विमेन इन प्लानिंग एंड इम्प्लीमेंटेशन, विमेन को का हम अगर हम पहले से ये चीज माइंड में नहीं रखेंगे तो हम आगे उनको सपोर्ट नहीं कर पाएंगे। पटना में जब 2015 में बहुत बड़ा फ्लड हुआ था, वो टाइम पे वहाँ की जो ट्रांसजेंडर कम्युनिटी थी, वहाँ पे एक रेशमा जी करके हैं, वो उसी कम्युनिटी से हैं और काफी काम कर रही हैं बिहार में। मुझे वो लास्ट में एनडीएमए की एक मीटिंग में मिली थी, उन्होंने मुझे अपनी पूरी स्टोरी बताई कि उस फ्लड के दौरान सारे ट्रांसजेंडर को 2 दिन तक कुछ खाने को भी नहीं मिला। तो क्या हम जो भी हमारे जो विमेन हैं या दूसरे जो जेंडर के लोग हैं, उनकी उनकी क्या नीड निकल के आएंगी, हमारी प्लानिंग में डालना बहुत जरूरी है। तो जब हम प्लानिंग में उसे डालेंगे, डिसीजन मेकिंग में उनका पार्टिसिपेशन होगा, दे वर पार्ट ऑफ कमेटीज जो डिसीजन ले रही हैं, तभी हम उसको इंश्योर कर पाएंगे। जैसे बिहार फ्लड में हुआ था कि जो वहाँ के लोकल जो सेल्फ हेल्प ग्रुप्स थे, उन्होंने ही सेल्फ जो कपड़े के बने हुए जो सैनिटरी पैड थे उनको सप्लाई किया। उससे उनको इनकम भी हुई और उससे उनको उन्होंने जो है वो भी किया। यहाँ तक कि आप लोगों ने देखा होगा ऑक्सफैम इसमें काफी काम करता है कि जब भी इस तरह की सिचुएशन होती है तो जो लोकल विमेन है उनको हैंडपंप को क्लोरीनेट करने की ट्रेनिंग दी जाती है, उनको रिपेयर और मेंटेनेंस करने की जिम्मेदारी दी जाती की ट्रेनिंग दी जाती है। उससे बेनिफिट ये होता है कि पानी की जिम्मेदारी नॉर्मली इंडियन फैमिलीज में विमेन के ऊपर आती है, और पानी नहीं है तो सबसे ज्यादा क्राइसिस भी उनको ही झेलना पड़ता है। तो कैसे, अगर वो खुद ही जानते हैं कि हम हमारे हैंडपंप को कैसे रिपेयर कर सकते हैं, कैसे मेंटेन कर सकते हैं, छोटी छोटी रिपेयरिंग का जो सामान है, टूल किट है, वो अगर उनके पास है तो वो खुद से उसको मेंटेन कर लेती हैं। तो ये उनको उनको पूरे प्रोसेस का हिस्सा बनाना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। जब तक वो खुद उनकी कैपेसिटी होगी अपनी सिचुएशन को हैंडल करने के लायक, तो ही ज्यादा अच्छे से वो कर पाएंगे। और एक्सेसिबल टू वॉश इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, बहुत बार ऐसा देखा गया है कि टॉयलेट इतना दूर होता है कि जहाँ लेडी नहीं जा पा रही है, सिर्फ जेंट्स जा पा रहे हैं, या फिर किसी ने ताला डाल दिया कि ये तो सिर्फ आदमियों का है, यहाँ तो ये है। तो उनकी एक्सेसिबिलिटी इंश्योर कराना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि उनके उनकी वो कैसे उस टॉयलेट को यूज कर सके, बाथरूम उनके लिए हो, पानी की सप्लाई उनके लिए हो, वो एक्सेसिबिलिटी इंश्योर कराना बहुत जरूरी है। जैसे राजस्थान का एक बहुत अच्छा एग्जांपल है, मैंने देखा था कि यूनिसेफ ने वहां पे जो कैंप थे वहां पे ऐसे टॉयलेट्स और बाथरूम बनाए थे जहाँ पे उन्होंने रेलिंग भी लगाई थी, जिससे कि जो फिजिकली चैलेंज विमेन या मेन है या बच्चे हैं वो भी उसको यूज कर पाएंगे। तो ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। और हमें प्रोटेक्शन का जो वो है वो भी एक देखना पड़ेगा कि कहीं ना कहीं ऐसी सिचुएशन में कोविड का बड़ा बड़ा एग्जाम्पल है हमारे सामने। बस 2 मिनट में आई, 2 मिनट में आई। तो जैसे हमें कोविड का टाइम का जो याद है कि कोविड के टाइम पे सबसे ज्यादा कहीं ना कहीं विमेन के ऊपर ही डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस हुआ था, गर्ल्स के ऊपर बहुत डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस हुआ था। तो कैसे उस टाइम पे वो उस वायलेंस को वो कैटर कर सके और कैसे उस वायलेंस से अपने आप को बाहर निकाल सके, रिपोर्ट कर सके, सही अपने लिए जो है उनको सर्विसेज है उनको ले सके, तो ये बहुत जरूरी है। और कल्चरली अप्रोप्रिएटेड हमारा पूरा जो मैसेजेस है, जो हमारा अवेयरनेस है, पूरी उसमें कल्चरली को ध्यान में रखते हुए डालना चाहिए, चाहे वो पिक्चर्स हो, चाहे वो मैसेजेस हो, चाहे वो लैंग्वेज हो। जितने भी हमारी अवेयरनेस सेटिंग है उसमें हमें उनके कल्चर को ध्यान में रखते हुए ही सारे के सारे, कि अगर वो साड़ी पहनती है तो साड़ी पहन के कैसे वो पानी लेके आ सकती हैं, उस तरह के बर्तन, उस तरह का रास्ता, उस तरह का हैंडपंप, या वो किस तरह का उनका कल्चर है, उसको ध्यान में रखते हुए हमें करना पड़ेगा। जैसे 2021 में जब उत्तराखंड में फ्लड हुआ, तो हाइजीन प्रमोशन के दौरान वहां पे जो गढ़वाली जो लैंग्वेज के जो फोक सॉन्ग्स हैं, उनके थ्रू उनको जो मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन के मैसेजेस थे वो पास ऑन किए गए। तो उस तरह का हमें कल्चरली अप्रोप्रिएट वो यूज करना पड़ेगा। और इक्विटी इन एक्सेस टू रिसोर्सेज, कि जितने भी रिसोर्सेज हैं, वॉश रिसोर्सेज हो या दूसरे रिसोर्सेज हो, उन पर उनको इक्वली उनका एक्सेस होना चाहिए, और उनकी कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग करना बहुत जरूरी है। और जो जितनी भी पॉलिसीज हैं, जैसे मैं एक बहुत अच्छी पॉलिसी मैंने देखी कुछ दिनों पहले, उसमें जेंडर पे काफी अच्छा लिखा गया है। यहाँ चैट बॉक्स में उसको डालती हूँ। करीब 2 साल पहले एनडीएमए और एनआईडीएम ने मिलकर उसको बनाया था। तो उसमें ये जेंडर से रिलेटेड जो डिस्कशंस है, स्ट्रैटेजी कैसी बननी चाहिए, वो बहुत क्लियरली उसमें लिखा हुआ है। तो आप लोग जरूर उसको देखिएगा, मैं इसमें डालती हूँ चैट बॉक्स में। सो थैंक यू सो मच, थैंक यू सो मच।
Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am, for your brief, kind words and for sharing how gender responsive wash strategies are crucial for ensuring equitable access to safe sanitation and by addressing the unique needs of all genders, including women, girls, and transgenders individually, we can create inclusive and dignified solutions. And what key steps we can enhance gender inclusivity in wash policies. So, moving to the last panelist of this session, I'd like to invite Miss Nidhi Goel. But before that, I'd like to have a brief bio of Miss Nidhi. So, Ms. Nidhi Ashok is founder and executive director of Rising Flame, an organization dedicated to advancing the leadership and rights of women, youth, and persons with disabilities in India. With over 12 years of experience in disability rights and gender justice, she has influenced policies and human rights discourse at national, regional, and global levels. She served on the steering committee of the C20 process during India's G20 presidency in 2023 and led the creation of Disability Equality and Justice Working Group. She was also appointed as an ambassador of the Purple Fest by the Goa government, India's largest festival on disability and diversity. Ms. Nidhi sits on key advisory groups, including the National Human Rights Commission Core Group on Disability and FICCI's Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. She recently completed her term as president of the Ambassador of Women Rights in Development as a global advisor and UN Women Executive Director and advocate for inclusive policies and systems. Nidhi has worked with leading organizations like Human Rights Watch, Sight Savers, and CREA. She is also India's first female disabled stand-up comedian using humor to challenge stereotypes around disability and gender. That's really great to hear. I really welcome you, ma'am. The floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I just realized that on the web somewhere is is an older version of my profile. So thank you so much. I think the previous speakers have really covered a spectrum of things. And it's great that I get to go last because it's not only challenging, but also exciting to just bring all the points together and to reinforce spaces, right? So just to start with a little bit about my introduction, I've been working in this field of disability rights and gender justice for about 14 years now, or over 14 years now. And I've worked at all the levels as local, national, as well as global, right? Being an advisor or in board advisory and strategic capacities with the Dutch ministry, with Government of India through G20, with UNRC's office, where we're leading the sustainable development process right now. Why does this become important? And of course, cross-movement work between women's rights movements, disability rights movement, and sexual rights movements. Why did I start with this? The important thing to highlight this introduction was also to say that what I will be presenting will be at this intersection. We heard from our first speaker who spotlighted needs of transgender persons and their inclusion in WASH initiatives. We heard a lot about accessibility, disability and inclusion. We heard about women and inclusion. Now, what is the spectrum when we say diversity and inclusion? Why do we need to think about inclusive WASH efforts? And the point to also remember is when we talk about DRR, we're talking about three big issues here. We're talking about DRR, we're talking about disaster response, to make it very simple. We're talking about WASH and water sanitation, the entire initiative and spectrum. And then we're talking about margins and inclusions. The way all of this comes together is in very interesting, tricky, and complex ways. And I have the privilege to present that because I'm a woman with a disability myself. So thinking about what disability inclusive wash looks like. We heard a lot about accessibility, about accessible toilets, about, really technical stuff also around making, right from handrails to toilet seats to ramps accessible, and providing inclusive wash for people with disabilities. But why is it important? I always start with this question on when we talk about disability inclusion, and I'll come to gender in a minute. We're looking at a world where every sixth person lives with a disability. Yeah, so I'm not making up these numbers, these are official numbers out there, global data. Why do we want to think about women with disabilities? Because every fifth woman lives with a disability. Now, when we have these kinds of statistics and we're thinking about designing for WASH, designing for an inclusive response mechanism, are we thinking that 25% or 20% or 18% of the population who we are designing for may be people with disabilities? To add to that data point is also that more than 80% of people with disabilities live in developing countries and the global south. We need to look at this very holistically, because not only because the census of 2011 shows very low data, but because after 2011, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016 brings the number of disability from very few to 21. So we're recognizing many more people saying that they live with disabilities, but the data has still not recognized because we've not had a national, like a holistic census after that, right? So that's one of the gaps, which is data and how we can strengthen it. But also that leaves us, to use politically incorrect word, since I'm blind, I can use it. It leaves us blindsided, right? It does not give us an entire picture of who we are designing for and why inclusion, dignity, safety, all of this becomes important. It would also not justify why, with each of the speakers, I could sit up and say, yes, transgender persons with disabilities, women with disabilities, people with disabilities, but across disabilities. So thinking about some of these becomes extremely critical to look at the numbers, right? To recognize that disability is cross-cutting and it will always be an intersectional conversation. When we are looking at WASH initiatives for caste marginalized, we need to look at caste marginalized persons with disabilities. When we're looking for women, and when we talk about, okay, distribution of menstrual hygiene products, but also disposal of menstrual hygiene products, there are many people who have been investing in innovation and thinking about what that innovation looks like. Do we have incinerators where people with short stature, right? So little people, or as the impairment term says, dwarf, or people using wheelchairs and so on and so forth, women using wheelchairs, women who are little persons, can they access these incinerators, right? So I'm just trying to say or establish the platform that we need to think collectively, holistically, and intersectionally to think about disability and WASH together. I would also like to request people to excuse me because I would have some points that may overlap, but let's take it as a reinforcing of the discussion rather than an overlap of the discussion. So inaccessible WASH infrastructure are major obstacle, right? So physical barriers in reaching and using toilets, water points, hygiene facilities, lack of ramps, handrails, adequate space for mobility devices. So was talking about moving within the toilets, right? So all of these makes the infrastructure inaccessible. Inaccessible disposal mechanism for menstrual hygiene products or sanitary napkins and so on. But also for incontinence material. So when we're talking about women and we're talking about disposal for a safe, accessible disposal for menstrual waste, we're not talking about incontinence waste. When we're talking about people with disabilities and saying we need to think about the incontinence waste that comes through, we're not talking about the menstrual waste. But somehow all of these need to come together, and thinking about disposal mechanism becomes very important. Adapted wash technologies and hygiene, there is a lack of that. Products that meet the specific needs of persons with disabilities, but also persons with diverse disabilities. Often when we're talking about accessibility, we get stuck into the whole conversation about either blind folks or folks living with locomotor disability. We have a disability, as someone said, is not, not somebody was mentioning this in the context of gender, right? But disability is also not homogeneous. And very often people living with invisible disabilities, with chronic illness, with chronic pain, and other conditions get lost in this whole discussion when we're talking about disability and accessibility. And more often, the invisible conditions of women with disabilities are then left behind. Thinking about assistive devices like raised commodes, now we also need to think, how are we talking about raised commodes and other things when we don't have accessible toilets in the built infrastructure at all? And why thinking about wash before thinking about disaster and wash together becomes important is when we design for all. The universal design principle, when we design with this, we design for all, right? So we have been talking about gender neutral toilets when it comes to gender marginalized people. Persons with disabilities always had gender neutral toilets because we were talking about accessible toilets, right? And it was one of our angst. We were getting up and saying, but I am a woman with a disability. I want an accessible toilet, which is a gendered toilet for my own safety. So thinking about how to provide accessible gender neutral toilets as well as gendered toilets that are accessible within safe spaces that women may access, men may access. So really thinking about it in an intersectional way would be important. Thinking about how are we furnishing this information, right? So we're talking about creating and building and ensuring accessible wash facilities. How's the information and communication around this coming to people with disabilities, right? Just as a blind woman, of course, again, my fellow speakers were talking about when we are taking a trip, or travel plans, one of the key things is whether we'll find a decent, safe, clean public toilet. As a disabled woman, my preparation goes way higher. As someone who has high support needs, this would go even higher. As someone who can only use accessible toilets, it would go even higher. And we're thinking about if there are accessible toilets along the way, if you have all of these, if you've ensured inclusive wash facilities, are we providing information in accessible formats, right? So accessible format does not only mean audio for blind people. It means easy to read versions. It means sign language. It means a lot of information coming in diverse formats that can reach people with disabilities. Captioned media, right? So we also need to think that information and communication, when made accessible, again goes on universal design principles and universal access principles, where if we design it for a particular group, which is people with disabilities or across disabilities, we cover many folks. The accessible toilets, also the physical infrastructure covers elderly, pregnant women, with people having temporary illnesses, etc. The digital covers people who are low literacy and so on and so forth. The very important thing that all of us will say and will keep repeating is the negative attitudes around people with disabilities, right? And the stereotypes and stigma, the invisibility, but also around women with disabilities. This asexualizing of women with disabilities, and it's important to know, because when we say women need privacy, but we don't think women with disabilities need privacy. We say women need safety, but we don't think women with disabilities need safety. It's a part of infantilizing women with disabilities. It's a part of desexualizing women with disabilities. And what happens as a result is we're invisible, not just in the data, we're excluded from WASH decision making, right? When policy design is happening, who's at the table? We are definitely not at the table. When we're talking about safety, who's at the table? We're definitely not at the table. What happens when it's inaccessible? It is undignified, but what happens when it's a woman with a disability who's menstruating and there is no accessibility? It's also unsafe, not from a health standpoint, but from an abuse standpoint, right? We're also allowing strangers to then lift them, push them, hold them, creating higher vulnerability for women with disabilities and the chances of abuse. Limited participation of people with disabilities and their representative organization is another big challenge in the designing, implementation, as well as monitoring and evaluation of WASH programs. And the last sort of a challenge is we're neglecting also the crucial role and specific needs of caregivers who where they need support to meet the needs of people with disabilities and their WASH requirements. Caregivers actually often lack support and resources. They don't know often how to support. They don't know where is the infrastructure. They don't know if they will get further support to help the high support needs women with disabilities and persons with disabilities. And therefore, they themselves have physical and mental health challenges. So we're talking about holistic, like a family impact. We're talking about a caregiver impact. We're talking about women with disabilities. Now, one of the examples that I definitely want to give you from a WASH perspective, in cases where accessible toilets are not available and women with disabilities have high support, they're left in a corner when they're menstruating for 3 days, right? Because nobody wants to touch them, nobody wants to support them, taking them to a toilet, which mean carrying and taking them, cleaning them, etc. It has been a huge challenge. Where accessible toilets are not available, where support is not available, where adequate sanitary material is not available, and so on and so forth. One of the points is insufficient data and evidence on specific WASH challenges faced by women and persons with disabilities. What does this do? This hinders the effective targeting of interventions and prioritization, right? Prioritization of what? Of investments. How will we find scalable solutions, right? How will we find solutions that are implementable and scalable and sustainable? So it's really important to do that. Lack of control studies to assess disability inclusive WASH interventions in cases of disaster, but also just the data around disaster being really poor. We need live locations of people with disabilities. The disaster response mechanism overall, other than the basic infrastructure, is really dismal. It's really bleak. We're looking at inadequate funding and prioritization of disability and gender within WASH and disaster response programs and policies. But also when it's an emergency, it almost is about saving the fittest, survival of the fittest, and so on and so forth. The shelter spaces in of itself, the facilities available there, and all of that is not accessible. Policies may lack specific details that women need, right? Women, like our previous speaker spoke about, culturally sensitive response. We're talking about disability and gender sensitive response within those cultures as well. Exacerbation of existing barriers we know happens in the time of disaster response, where people with disabilities are overlooked right from the time of warning to providing rescue, shelter, and WASH services are needed. Some of the recommendations, because I know I'm at the almost up with the 10 minutes that were allocated to me. I think we need to focus on simply what is available to people with disabilities and women with disabilities in the center while designing a response, right? The ability to access WASH services, and all of us have been saying it, safely and with dignity. So meaningful participation of people with disabilities and their representative organizations is paramount, because the disability rights movement agenda or mantra is nothing about us without us. Engaging women and people with disabilities, why I'm not saying, I'm repeating, emphasizing women with disabilities, is because when we engage only with people with disabilities, we somehow ungender people with disabilities. We don't talk about the specific needs of women with disabilities. We have them, we need to have them in the disaster response, disaster planning, response, and recovery to ensure the diverse needs and inclusive solutions are met. Leadership of women with disabilities is crucial for transforming systems and services, and partnering with their organizations is important. Strengthening data collection to identify the WASH needs and vulnerabilities of women with disabilities and people with disabilities in disaster contexts particularly. And the data needs to be disaggregated by disability, age, gender, caste, and other markers. Investing in research to better understand impacts of climate change and other risks, disaster risks on disability and WASH access. And of course, design, implement, and rigorously evaluate the interventions in disaster preparedness and WASH response. Wash infrastructure and information in emergency settings. Please ensure that that's done in universally designed fashion or manner, which then makes it accessible and inclusive for all, including the communication needs, assistive devices, etc. Addressing stigma and discrimination around women and persons with disabilities becomes imperative before we can even think about creating all of these systemic changes, and strengthening coordination between disaster management agencies, WASH actors, and disability organizations, and of course, other relevant stakeholders or sectors to ensure a comprehensive and cohesive response. Last but not the least, all of this cannot be achieved if we don't allocate or advocate to allocate adequate resources for disability, gender, and other marginalization, inclusive WASH and disaster response within our long-term recovery efforts. So in conclusion, that safe, dignified WASH efforts in disaster situation is important. It's not just a matter of humanitarian aid. It's not a welfare issue. It's a fundamental human rights for women with disabilities, for persons with disabilities, for gender marginalized persons with disabilities, for caste marginalized persons with disabilities. We need to place inclusion at the center of our efforts to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for the well-detailed and explained words you have shared. Even we know disability inclusive wash in emergency is essential to ensure safety and dignified access to all. Emergency response must prioritize accessible infrastructure, as you were saying, SSU technologies and community engagement to meet diverse needs. So, what exactly is how can we strengthen wash interventions for persons with disabilities in crisis situation? It was really honored to hear from you. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Gursimran for the vote of thanks. And since my part is done here, I forward the platform is now yours, Simran.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us this insightful session. And we will have more webinar on this topic and many other related topics. If you have any suggestion or feedback, please feel free to write to us, and stay tuned our social media channel for regular update for Spare India Academy. And thank you so much, Fatima ma'am. And thank you so much, our panelists.
Thank you, everyone.